So just reflecting on some of those issues raised by the EFF leader, South Africa is in the midst of its worst economic crisis in recent history, which has seen a dramatic increase in unemployment and hunger and a significant decline in economic growth. In the GDP figures released by Stats SA this week, the president says there are encouraging signs of a revival in many sectors of our economy, and in rising business confidence, we are seeing the green shoots, he said, that emerge after a devastating fire. Load shedding, however, seems to be threatening all of this, and to discuss this is Alan Mukoki, who is the CEO of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. So now, there is no doubt that the prospect of a continued energy shortfall and further load shedding presents a massive risk to our economy. But just how bad do you foresee it? What is the worst case scenario?
Well, it is as bad. I mean, good evening to you and your listeners. It is as bad as it looks, and I think that we fear that it might be worse, purely because it's not particularly clear what the permanent strategy is going to be to resolve the issue. Remember that Eskom has got really big issues. One is capital. The second one, which is a very massive one, is the whole idea of an aged infrastructure that they have in terms of their own power plants. And then you've got the issue of maintenance, which can't be funded purely because there isn't sufficient money coming in terms of revenue. Then you've got a very bloated staff complement that creates a huge potential problem with unions if you were to go for massive retrenchments in that particular environment. And then, of course, I spoke about the very idea that the revenues are very low. And, you know, society can't afford more of these high tariffs because the tariffs that Eskom has had to ask for are way, way, way above inflation rate. So we have a very serious problem. And I think that we do need to see a situation with the shareholder. And I don't think that we can blame management at this point in time. Most of them are new, the body's new. But I think that the fundamental problem that we all have to face is that the shareholder has been responsible for the mess that we find ourselves in at Eskom. And I think that the time has come to have that big conversation, yes.
And I want to talk about the timelines. There's still too much speculation for there to be certainty from potential investors for the markets. I mean, some are saying this load shedding is here to stay, possibly the next 5 years. Of course, Eskom denies this, but it is a fact that its debt levels are high. They don't even have the finances to invest further in energy generation capacity and their ailing infrastructure.
Well, that's a fact. I mean that we need to proceed with the structural reforms that we've all been calling for, because all these are short-term measures. In the final analysis, we need to deliver a sustainable economic growth model for South Africa that will resolve these big issues such as unemployment, poverty, inequality, and make sure that it's a very sustainable program. I think that we've been saying this for a very long time now, that South Africa needs to move from being a developing economy to becoming a developed economy. Many other people have done it, and we always make the example of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Russia, Australia, and Israel. That these are countries which are non-Western countries over the last 100 years that have actually managed to move their economies from developing to developed and resolve these issues that we are now facing. Because the short-termism has got to come out of the window. It doesn't really matter what we do in the short term. We need to fix the structural issues. We need to fix the education. We need to go into those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including end to hunger, end to poverty, quality education, good health and well-being, gender equality, a very, very critical component, and make sure that we drive the infrastructure and make sure we get the cheap, affordable energy as well as water and sanitation to our people. And those are the things that you do in the Human Development Index that gives you an element of sustainability around your investors, because investors look at what is happening in your market. No one wants to come and invest in South Africa. South Africa itself is not a market, and South Africa itself has to develop the region as well as the rest of the African continent, deploy our capital, our engineering wherewithal, our management consulting capabilities, and all these things that we can actually do from a leadership point of view in the rest of Africa, so we develop those particular markets out there. It's a pipe dream to assume that we can do things in South Africa, but ignore the rest of Africa, which is supposed to be our major market into the future.
So the cost of this darkness, are we recognizing opportunities where they do exist? And a lot of it the problems have been pointed at leadership. So has important progress in addressing the energy crisis been made under the leadership of the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy in the past few months in light of this?
Well, look, we need to have a bigger discussion. I think that we've come to a point where we as South Africans need to have a very significant level of introspection around whether who we have around the room in resolving the issues are in fact the right people. I think that we as SACI, for instance, have raised the issue of governance at SOC broadly and generally to say that we do not believe, with all the good intent and promise and hope, that the type of structure that we currently have now, the kind of system of how we appoint people to be board members in SOEs is optimal or it's working for us. We need to create an independent structure, not dissimilar to what you see with the Judicial Services Commission. Staff it with people who have the level of competence, track record, who understand what needs to be done in respect of running corporations. I think that that's what we need to be able to do, so that when we appoint people who are board members, we know that we're bringing in the level of expertise and allow the independent, non-executive board members to run the show, to hire the best executives that they can actually find without the interference of government or of the shareholder at this particular point in time. So that's one of the key areas in respect of the changes that we're actually calling for, because we're going to go around in circles with this particular issue. You've seen all the issues that have come up out of the Zondo Commission. We're not anywhere near resolving that particular specific item, because we know that the mess happened because we allowed too much involvement of people that should not have been involved in running those SOEs.
Okay. Are we shining a wider light on risk, for instance, and are we properly identifying the market barriers and how to unlock them?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because we can't have the smaller items without fixing the contextual items. I said earlier on that South Africa needs to take very big decisions. In other words, we need to be able to say, what are the priorities for us as a country? I said earlier on, we need to agree whether we're working with a national development plan, how are we going to resource and fund it and put the right people around it. If we want to talk about building a meritocracy, we need to take the steps, and I'm happy that Minister Mkhulu has already started taking those particular steps in putting together the committee that he has put together to look at building a meritocracy within the public service. We need to be able to make those structural reform issues so that we can deal with the broader contextual issues, because the small little things are more trickled down. In other words, you fail to fix education, you fail to fix governance, you fail to build the necessary level of infrastructure that is required to sustain economic development over a longer period of time, because you don't have the right people to do it. Therefore, you cannot attract the right levels of capital or investment, because you lack the level of credibility, or people do not have confidence in you. You are not actually going to get into this long-term play that we are all talking about. So we need to go back to the basics and say, if we're fixing the public sector as a state, let's get the best people available in terms of skills, in terms of qualifications, in terms of technical competence, in terms of experience, and let's change the compensation structure of the civil service if that is one of the barriers that is not enabling us to hire the right people, and then fix the governance and make sure that we create public servants that are career professionals. Not this idea where people go into the public service, they are constantly looking behind their shoulders whether a new minister who comes in is not going to put them out. Therefore, they are susceptible to being persuaded to do things that they ought not to be doing, because they themselves are too worried about their own careers.
All right.
So South Africa is facing two problems, not one. Yes.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Alan Mukoki, thank you very much. He's the CEO of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Now let's take a look at